Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tony Arend. I'm a professor and the director of the Master of Science in Foreign Service program. And on behalf of all of us at Georgetown, I want to welcome you to this international conference on cyber engagement. You may not know that the School of Foreign Service was founded in 1919. Now, none of us are in the room were alive in 1919, so using your imagination, think back. 1919 was a tumultuous year in the history of international affairs. The First World War had just come to an end. The Great War, the most devastating conflict the international system had seen. The League of Nations was being created, a global organization dedicated to promoting international peace and security. And the United States found itself in a very different position in the international system, a position of prominence, a position of leadership. 1919. Well, it was in that year, in November of that year, that right here in Gaston Hall, Edmund A. Walsh gave a speech. The speech was entitled, "The Aims of the School of Foreign Service." And in that speech, Father Walsh articulated a vision. His vision was to create here at Georgetown a place to prepare people for careers in the public sector and private sector of international affairs. Today, nearly 100 years later, Father Walsh's vision is our mission at Georgetown. We seek to prepare people for careers in the public sector, the private sector, and today we would add the nonprofit sector of international affairs. And we seek to promote cutting-edge research on a variety of critical global issues. So, with this 100 years having passed, I can't help but think that Father Walsh is somewhere smiling down on us today. First, because he would have wanted us to investigate, to look at one of the critical issues challenging the international system today, cybersecurity. An issue which calls into question our traditional paradigms for understanding international relations and invites new ways of thinking, creative, inner ways of thinking about the international system. And because he would have been proud to see people from the public sector, from the private sector, and from the nonprofit sector coming together to collaborate, to think about these innovative ways of addressing a common problem. And so with that, as Father Walsh smiles down upon us, I want to welcome everybody to Georgetown University and introduce the impresaria of this entire conference, Dr. Catherine Lotriante. My dear friend and colleague, Dr. Catherine Lotriante, conceived of this conference several years ago, organized it, implements it, and will now tell us what to expect over the course of today. Dr. Lotriante.
Thank you, everyone. Well, we're back here again for the 5th year, and I'd like to personally welcome those of you who have not had the chance to join us before, and welcome back those that have kind of stuck with us over the last couple of years. This year, I thought about a different title. We always call this conference the International Conference on Cyber Engagement. But this year, we've kind of tried to be a little different and add something new to it, and we're calling it Enhancing Cooperation Across Digital Borders. And you'll hear a lot of the different aspects of the challenges that we face across these borders in the digital realm. Throughout the day, you'll be introduced to a number of panel experts. But I wanted to open it up with a few thoughts of my own before I introduce our first keynoter. Never before in the history of humanity has a communications medium evidenced such high levels of interpersonal interactivity, informational storage and retrieval capacity, and transnational commercial and networking potential as the internet has. Based on electronic connections between countless millions of computers, servers, and local networks located around the globe, the internet is linked by technical protocols that are highly synchronized and decentralized. Cyberspace, that otherworldly sphere created by the internet, exists in real time as millions of individuals are wired into its everyday material applications. Perhaps progress in the technology of the internet may gradually begin to have a more powerful influence on the areas of high politics. Efforts are underway to establish rules and understandings through which all nations can benefit from such technological and economic change. Success is far from assured, though, but the search for principles and a framework to achieve these goals is welcomed by almost everyone because the benefits and financial stakes are so very high. The question is whether states are ready to accept political losses in order to ensure economic and social gains. Due to the global cross-cutting nature, scope, and reach of this digital realm, most of the policy decisions on cyberspace-related issues have international implications that necessitate active international engagement, collaboration, and coordination. Where cooperation among different forces prevail over confrontation, things have started to change in the right direction. But this effort must be lasting. This Georgetown University International Conference on Cyber Engagement meets once a year and is certainly not one of the most important venues where important developments are taking place. There is the UN and the Council of Europe, the OSCE and NATO, the AU, OAS, ASEAN, and ARF, and forums like the UNGGE and the recent global conference on cyberspace that took place just the other week at The Hague. Least you think such a call to action to work together across borders is idealistic or based on liberal values, it is also an act of realism. The threats we face in the cyber domain, the challenges of cybersecurity, have never been so complex. They require complex, articulated responses. The time when superpowers thought they could split the world into spheres of influence is long gone, and we should all realize that. No global actor today can realistically aspire at facing the challenges of cyberspace or truly benefiting from its opportunities alone. We need cooperation through engagement more than ever. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first keynote speaker for the day. I'm thrilled that we are actually starting with Congressman Hurd. Congressman Hurd was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. After college, Mr. Hurd served as an undercover officer in the CIA in the Middle East and South Asia for nearly a decade, collecting intelligence and influencing our national security agenda. Upon leaving the CIA, he became a special advisor with a cybersecurity firm, covering a wide range of complex challenges faced by manufacturers, financial institutions, retailers, and critical infrastructure owners. He was also a partner with a strategic advisory firm, helping businesses expand into the international markets. In 2015, Mr. Hurd was elected to the 114th Congress and currently serves on the Committee of Oversight and Government Reform and chairs the Information Technology Subcommittee, along with serving on the Homeland Security Committee and Vice Chair of the Border and Maritime Subcommittee. Congressman Hurd, welcome.
Howdy. Got a couple of Aggies in the crowd. Well, it's an honor to be here with y'all today. I was told before I began my remarks that the last person to speak here was Tony Blair and Bill Clinton. So I have big shoes to fill. But before I begin, I kind of want to get an idea of who's in the crowd. So if you're a student, will you stand up? Okay, thank you. Sit down. I'm in the military. There we go. I'm in the press. Okay, I'm gonna keep an eye on you. No, I'm on the staff here, the faculty here at Georgetown. We got a few? Okay. You know, I thought what I'd do is talk about how did a young kid from San Antonio, Texas, get to Gaston Hall to talk about cybersecurity, and then give kind of a snapshot of what I've learned in my whopping 14 weeks in Congress. I had got an internship to work for a robotics company in San Antonio and fell in love with the idea, decided to study computer science at Texas A&M University. And I had never been outside of Texas my freshman year, until my freshman year in college, and I said, I want to go somewhere else. And I saw a sign on campus that said, take 2 journalism classes in Mexico City for $450, and I had $475 in my bank account. And went to Mexico City, fell in love being within the culture, added international studies as a minor, and had a professor, a guest lecturer, who was a former CIA guy, tell the most amazing stories. And the next day, I went and knocked on his door and said, tell me more. And that began my interest and fascination with the CIA. And when I graduated with a degree in computer science from Texas A&M, I went straight into the National Clandestine Service, or the Directorate of Operations for the CIA. I was the guy in the back alleys collecting intelligence on threats to the homeland. Right? I spent 2 years here in D.C., 2 years India, 2 years Pakistan, 2 years in New York City doing interagency work, and then a year and a half in Afghanistan, where I managed all of the undercover operations in the country. On the day I left Texas to drive up here to Washington, D.C., was the day the USS Cole was bombed in the Gulf of Aden. And then I started my career with Al-Qaeda, ended my career with Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And I left the CIA in order to run for Congress. And the reason was I was pretty shocked by the caliber of our elected officials. And I've told the story of how I got asked by a senior member of the House Intelligence Committee when I was in Afghanistan, what was the difference between a Sunni and a Shia, right? Which I thought was unacceptable. And so my mama said, you're either part of the problem or part of the solution, and decided to run for Congress. And having been in Congress for 14 weeks, my opinion hasn't changed very much. But what I will say is that people are trying, and they know, you know what you know what you don't know, but what you don't know is the largest of those 3 categories. And I've been pleasantly surprised that many of my colleagues recognize what they don't know, and a lot of that is in this space in cybersecurity. I am the chairman of a subcommittee on information technology. I didn't realize how big of a deal that was. After the election, we won, and my Jason Chaffetz, the chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, called me and said, Will, we're creating another subcommittee, and we want you to do it. And not at one point did I talk about Oversight and Government Reform Committee during the campaign, and I didn't have the heart to tell him over the phone that I was going to say no. And then I came back and tell all my team that, Jason Chaffetz called and he offered me this job. I didn't have the heart to tell him I'm not going to do it. And they all said, Heard, you're a moron. Take the job. It's a big deal. And what's great is I'm able to use my background and experience to be helpful to the nation. So my degree is in computer science. I could probably bang out some Fortran 77 code right now. But I understand the principles and theories. When I ran for office for the first time in 2010, lost a runoff by 700 votes, joined a consulting firm called Crumpton Group, small boutique firm based here. I was a Texas guy, and we would help clients, answer strategic questions. And they all started asking us about cybersecurity issues. And we said, we know a guy. And then I helped Matt DeVoe, who teaches here at Georgetown, start Fusion X. Technical vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, things like that. And I've got to learn a lot about what the private sector faces. When I was in the CIA, I did some offensive cyber operations. I will never go to Moscow. They're still a little upset about a couple of things they found out I did. So we're gonna stay away from there. But it's great being in a position to do something about this. But here's the scary thing, right? I've only been doing this for 14 weeks, and I recognize that there's been a lot of folks, many of y'all have been working in this space for a really long time, but there's still some very basic questions that we haven't been able to answer as a whole of government. If North Korea launches a missile into San Francisco, we all know how we would respond. The North Koreans know how we would respond. That's a physical on physical attack. Now, a digital on physical attack, we have an example of that, Stuxnet from a couple years ago. But what constitutes a digital on digital attack? What constitutes a digital act of war? You know, there's a lot of different groups. I'm sure they talked about this at RSA last weekend. I'm sure many of y'all talk about this in your office, but I don't know what the answer is. And this is something that until we are able to answer some of these basic questions, we're not, we need y'all having these kinds of conversations, because that's actually going to change the nature of this threat if people know what an appropriate countermeasure is. One of the things I'm trying to do in my position is sit and talk with as many people as I can about this issue. And I'm looking at 4 areas. One area is IT procurement. Again, not a topic I brought up during the campaign. It's not a sexy topic, but when $80 billion of federal is being spent by the federal government on IT procurement, and 80% of that is on legacy systems, stuff that we would all think are old and outdated, that's unacceptable. The way, the federal government has 9,726 data centers. And I asked the head of GAO, the Government Accounting Office, what's the optimal number of data centers the federal government should have? And he said 4,000. I think it's more like 13, right? And, when we have the tools available to us, when you have the cloud, and we're not utilizing some of this technology, that's a problem, and that creates inefficiencies in government. So I spent a lot of time talking about IT procurement. The second issue, emerging technology. It all touches here. I saw when I walked in, some of y'all have Fitbits. But if you put a heart monitor on that Fitbit, it becomes a medical device. What about driverless cars? That's probably here a lot sooner than we expected. How do you manage that? 3D printing, really cool. Pretty much every high school has a 3D printer now. But what happens when you 3D print something that has patent issues? Right? These are all some of the issues that tie in here. And the last area that I spent a lot of time talking about is of course, cybersecurity and information sharing. We passed some legislation last week, 2 bills out of the HIPSI, House Intelligence Committee, and then also out of Homeland Security, that provides liability protection for businesses to share, amongst themselves in the industry and with the federal government. But this is just the beginning. This is just creating a framework to allow that sharing. But there's some basic questions like, what should we be sharing? Right? What should the federal government be sharing with private sector so that the private sector can better protect themselves? And it's not just federal government, the private sector. Now I'm on Homeland Security, CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, is not sharing information with ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. We need to improve that level of information sharing. DHS trying to share with FBI and CIA and NSA, that's not going as it's a lot better than it was in 2001. It's a lot better than it was in 2009, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And then how do you deal with the whole of government sharing with the private sector so that if there's data that we have that can help protect your digital infrastructures, we need to be able to share it. So it's great being in a position to ask some of these questions, to be involved in this debate, but there's still a lot of questions out there. Last year the Congress passed a bill called FITARA. It's basically trying to empower CIOs. So we have a federal CIO, but that federal CIO doesn't necessarily have complete control and jurisdiction over the CIOs in the various departments. When you look at the CIO in a department, they don't necessarily have the ability to dictate what type of equipment should be going on their network or how it's protected. That's insane. In the private sector, you wouldn't do that. And so we're trying to empower CIOs in order to have more responsibility in this area in order to protect our digital infrastructure. And one thing that my friend Matt DeVoe taught me is that businesses, anybody who manages a network, you got to begin with the presumption of breach. You give my guys, whether it was in the CIA or Fusion X, enough time, I'm getting in your network. We never not got in. You know, when I'm back in Texas, I usually describe my job when I was with Fusion X as we basically broke into banks and stole their money and show them how we did it. And we were pretty expensive too, by the way. And our clients would, when they would look at, you know, our price point, I'd say, well, you know, you could let us keep what we take. And nobody ever took us up. Nobody ever took us up on that offer because we never not got in, right? So you got to begin with the presumption of breach. And people got to begin thinking, okay, how quickly can you detect a threat actor getting into your network? Can you quarantine them? And how fast can you kick them off the network, right? Because, you know, the idea of building a digital wall high enough, you're always going to have a ladder that's much bigger. So these are some of the issues that we've been dealing with, you know, over the last 14 weeks. It's exciting to have partners in this. John Ratcliffe, another freshman from Texas, on the Homeland Security Committee, runs the Cybersecurity committee there at Homeland. It's been fantastic working relationship with him. He's probably one of my closest friends up here in Washington, D.C. And one thing he and I talk about always is we got to be able to protect our digital infrastructure and protect our civil liberties at the exact same time. You know, this is something, when you talk about privacy, this is something that must always be in the forefront of our minds as we're looking at this issue. You know, it's something that can be done. We must do it because that's what's helped keep us one of the greatest countries on the planet. But some of the privacy laws that we have here versus Europe is causing a little bit of the difficulty in information sharing between us and our partners in Europe. I'm getting ready to go on a trip to the Middle East and in Europe to talk about ISIS. All right, but there is a cybersecurity component to that as well. So it is there's a lot of issues that need to be dealt with, and Catherine, you know, I would say this is an important place for a lot of these decisions to be made. I don't think it's going to be the UN or the EU that are going to solve these problems. They're going to be solved right here in the United States, right here in Washington, D.C., with the great minds that are going to school here, the people that are coming from all over the country to participate in these kinds of conversations. This kind of conversation is incredibly important to guys like me, you know, it's because I'm always trying to figure out, you know, how to get better, right? You know, I need y'all to be digging into the weeds and help educate me and my colleagues. I was at South by Southwest a couple of weekends ago on a panel, and I made the comment, I said, you know, here in Austin, where the conference was, amongst all you IT entrepreneurs, you know, I'm in the upper bottom third of folks that understand technology. But in Washington, D.C., I'm in the top 1%. And so it's I'm always constantly learning and using the resources of folks like y'all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there and open it up to questions. And pearls of wisdom. I'm taking pearls of wisdom as well, too. So then I'm going to end with the CIA story. Yes, sir.
Not working on the Cyber Institute. You mentioned the 14 weeks you did at Congress, talk about the unknown unknowns. How do you feel about all the different committees on cybersecurity and where kind of
Thanks for the question. The question was, you know, there's all these different committees in Congress that deal with cybersecurity. What's the deal, all right? I've heard the term jurisdictional more in the last 14 weeks than I had my entire life, right? And one of the things that's great with John Ratcliffe and I, you know, we've already said that we're not going to let those kinds of silly things get in the way. And there needs to be some restructuring, I think. And you know, whether people that have the gavel are going to give up power, that's the million-dollar question. I do not know of any effort underway right now to address the committee structure and jurisdictional issues, but I do know that a lot of people are working together across committee lines to deal with these issues. And I've also been there's a couple of things that I was shocked by when I first got to Washington, D.C. The amount of hand-wringing that goes on here. It's like, you've been here for 20 years. How do you not have an opinion on this topic? But the other issue I've found is that the number of members that reach out to people who have an expertise in a particular issue. And I've definitely have benefited from that over these last couple of weeks. So people recognize that. But there's not a whole-scale move, but there needs to be. And again, I can use Homeland Security as a perfect example. Border Patrol, Homeland Security Committee has jurisdiction over that, but ICE, Judiciary, has jurisdiction over that. And these are both two agencies within the Department of Homeland Security. That's some of the issues that we have in federal government. But thank you for the question. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
I'm concerned about the amount of misinformation that's in the press about all of these things. And I don't know how we go about changing it. And how do we do that?
I think we could have a topic on, I think we could have a conference on that topic. But you're absolutely right. There is a lot of misinformation out there. I think part of it is knowing who the credible sources are on this information and getting that message out. There is, I can talk about any particular topic or issue where there's that type of info. But we look to groups like the people putting this conference on today to get that information out so that we understand what's really going on. And I'm going to try to be a voice to that. I'm a professional intelligence officer, and so my goal is to always get information from all kinds of sides. And when you see those overlapping areas, that's probably the closest to the truth you're likely to get. And so we're hopefully going to build that into our activities in this committee. But thanks for the question, and it's something important for y'all to discuss throughout this conference. Yes, sir.
Dan Gear, it's not a question per se, it's more like make a comment. In my opinion, and some others, cybersecurity is permanently offense dominant. And it's pretty clear that we're putting a lot of effort into the offense side. Do you think there's a role for that in the private sector?
This is probably one of the hottest topics that I've been involved in, is what is that role? How do you decide that? Because I think the scary scenario is, let's say a oil company in Houston that has a couple of thousand computers have been hacked, and they're using that to go into to attack the NSA or a military facility, right? Or they're using it to attack the electrical grid. You know where it's coming from, and what ability do you have to stop that? It's from servers coming in the U.S. There's not a lot of discussion on how you actually solve that particular problem if you can't engage that company. So this is an area where we have to think out what is it, how do we become offensive? Because the real issue is, how do we protect civil liberties in the scenario that you're talking about? So this is an area that is a touchy area, and this is something where I'm gonna look for many of y'all here in this crowd on how to answer. But thanks for the question. Well, I appreciate y'all's time today. I appreciate the conversation on this issue. It is something that it's only gonna get more complicated. It's only gonna get more complex. And one of the things that we need to continue doing is, we're having to build and educate our children for jobs that don't exist right now. We're having to stay at the pointy end of the spear. If we're going to keep our prominence, we're going to keep our country's prominence where it is, we got to be leading on these issues. We got to be forwarding ideas on how to continue to grow and evolve in this area. And it's great being part of the conversation. And I really appreciate y'all's being willing to engage and learn about these topics. Stay active, stay engaged. Myself and my colleagues need all the help we can get to sort through some of these issues, but because we have to get it right, I know we will, and I really do appreciate y'all's time. Thank you.